You younger people, you may not know that at one time, for quite a while, the mafia, its inner workings, and all that sort of thing, just largely weren't known in this country, and probably in Europe as well. It was a secret. It was a secret organization. We didn't know. We kind of had a working notion, Hollywood did some films about it, but it was all kind of vague. Who was in it, who wasn't in it, what it was exactly. I don't think the word mafia was used in film until the 60s. It wasn't used in the film The Godfather, I know, because they made a deal with the mafia, they wouldn't use it. What this allowed was for gangsters, this allowed two things. It allowed a lot of gangsters who had spent their life in crime to simply kind of fade into everyday life and leave their past behind. No one knew they had been gangsters. That didn't work in a lot of cases, especially for the guys who wanted it to work and had the money to work. It didn't work. Thugs like Luciano, Arcado, Chicago, they wanted to fit in. It wasn't going to happen. Frank Costello gave it the best try of all. He desperately wanted to be part of everyday society, to be respected. There's a story that when he was dying, the ambulance came to his house to get him, his apartment, and they were going to take him to the hospital just down the street. And he said, no, 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 I need to go to XYZ hospital. And the reason which was across town, and the reason he wanted to go there, because when he was younger, that was the place for the rich and famous to go. Well, of course, the neighborhood had changed. It was no longer the place to be. That the other thing it did is it allowed the mafia to put plants into powerful positions, corporations, government, and elected positions. And one of those guys was a Sicilian-born John C. Montana. He was a prominent Buffalo, New York businessman. He was a leading citizen, but he was just a plant for the Stefano Maga-ddino crime family up there. In fact, he was the counselor for the consigliere for the organization. He rose up through the ranks, so he wasn't just somebody who plopped into organized crime. He was so well insulated that at one point he was actually named Man of the Year by the Erie Club, which was the official social organization of the Buffalo Police Department. Publicly, he was a big promoter of civic things. He the Golden Gloves boxing. He staged that. He put that on. He was the director of the boys baseball clubs, the director of the SPCA. He was a very powerful leader in the Elks Club, the Chamber of Commerce. He was in that. So in the 1920s, though, he had been bootlegging and was really a power in the bootlegging thing in upstate New York, enough so that he was invited to the Mafia Conference in Chicago in 1931. Also, in the 20s, he was smart enough to form Buffalo Taxi Company with some of his relatives. And over the decades, he merged it with Yellow Cab and so on and so forth, and put money into it. So he had a virtual lock on the taxi business in the city of Buffalo for a long time. In 1927, he was elected to the City of Buffalo Council from the Niagara District. He was reelected in 1929. He served as chairman for housing and slum clearance and chairman for labor relations and compensation, which put him, both of these things, put him directly in touch with contractors who needed those departments. But up and aside from that, he did good stuff for the city. He did the slimy gangster stuff by working with contractors and that sort of, but mob approved contractors. But he also passed a lot of good laws. He did a lot to help the city improve itself. The city grew because of people like him. And it's clearly acknowledged in their history. But Montana ran for Congress in 1938 because he was very popular from the 41st district, which was heavily made up of Italians from the west side of the city. He ran as a Republican. He lost in the primary. Everything was hunky-dory for decades, and then the whole charade crashed. He was discovered at the Appalachian Conference, Mob Conference in 1957. His excuse was that he was going for a ride and the brakes on his car failed. And so he went there to get help, and gosh, jeepers, he had no idea there was a mafia meeting going on. So they asked him, well, if you didn't know, how come you ran through the woods with everybody else? And he said, well, someone opened the door and yelled, run, and everybody ran, so I ran with them. And, okay. Sergeant Crosswell, who was with the state police, his whole role has been sort of overbloated in this thing. But anyway, that's another story. They told him to be there. I mean, the federal government didn't have grounds to be there, so they told him to be there. Anyway, Montana offered to pay him off. He said, "Look, if you don't mention that I'm here, I'll take care of you." They got him later for attempted bribery. Investigations that followed really linked, it unveiled Montana completely. It really linked him to the mafia. They let it be known his brother Pete was employed by Joe Profaci's olive oil business. He had hosted, oh, and Joe Barbera, who hosted this summit, was partners with Montana in Empire State Brewery. Uh, and Jimmy LaDuca, who was also at the conference, was favored distributor for Montana. Montana had Buffalo Beverage Company, gave up distributorships for Budweiser beer, and his pal LaDuca got one. His bodyguard, Mafia guy Sammy Lagatuta, who was also at the conference, was associated with Montana. And then Montana said, quote, "I have nothing to hide, nothing to conceal. I can talk to the FBI, the tax people, anyone else in authority because I have not committed a crime," which technically, he hadn't done anything. He was a member of the mafia and that was it. But he hadn't done anything he could be in today's world. He could be, but at that time, he couldn't be prosecuted for anything. They maybe could have nailed him on a RICO, but then no. So Montana, here's where he made his mistake. The 50 guys that they had rounded up at the Appalachian meeting, to the man, all refused. They took the fifth. They said, "No, I'm going to incriminate myself. I have nothing to say to you." So the government couldn't get very far with them when they questioned them. The United States Senate couldn't get very far when they questioned them. But Montana stupidly decided to defend himself. He should have just shut up. Because when he spoke, he opened himself up now to questions. And he stuck to this ridiculous story about having car trouble. And then it became known, it was one revelation after another. Uh, his nephews, Charles and Jimmy DeLuca, the rest of his family were tied in with the mafia or just plain made members of the mafia. Bobby Kennedy, who was a lawyer for the McClellan Committee, uh, he asked publicly about Montana's association with this guy named Paul Palmieri, who was a gangster from Niagara Falls. And Montana said, "I've never heard of him. I don't know nothing about him." Then they showed him a picture of him and Palmieri hanging around. And Montana used this age-old excuse. He said, "Well, it's a political meeting." And then Kennedy said, "Well, no, it wasn't. You took this picture at the Del Golfo Society in 1939. It just got worse. He was eventually held for contempt for conspiracy to obstruct justice. It says to 5 years in jail and a $10,000 fine. He managed to tie that up for the longest time. In 1960, the United States Court of Appeals decided that none of the attendees had really committed a crime. By the meeting, they were all free from jail, including Montana on charges. Again, under RICO, I don't know. I'm not aware. I would guess they could have nailed him today, but back then it was just a bunch of guys having a cookout, you know. So Montana's political influence really was gone after that. He was eventually reduced in rank. All this took a toll. He died of a heart attack very suddenly in 1964.